Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining. We're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar about how to keep employees safe during a wildfire. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so here's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to just quick introduction as to who we are. We'll talk a little bit about U.S. wildfires and give a lay of the land there. We'll talk about how companies are currently responding to wildfires when they happen, just to get the ideas flowing a little bit, and then talk about specifically what you can do before, during, and after a wildfire, and how you can get started today. So let's jump into it. As always, if you have any questions, please add them into the chat. All right, so a quick introduction as to who we are. Whoops, this should show my name here. My name is Adriel. I'm the founder and CEO of Beehive. Beehive is an enterprise climate risk software company, which means we help our clients measure and then report on their financial exposure to natural disasters such as wildfires. And as part of that, many of our clients say, okay, now that we know that wildfire is a problem, what should we do about it? And so that sparked this conversation we are having here today. Um, this is what the Beehive software looks like. I won't show this very much, but one thing you can do in here is add all of your employees and say, what is the impact or where do I have employees living in wildfire prone areas? And maybe you just want to focus on the employees who have a high risk of being affected by a wildfire. And you can see that all in one place. And you can begin to say, hey, I want to get a broader view of my employees and how they are impacted by specifically wildfires. My little dummy Dave doesn't have a good set here because how are they impacted? And then you can begin to say, all right, I have all these employees being impacted by wildfires or whatever disaster. What should I begin to do about it? And so that is our initial roles to make it really easy to calculate that risk to your employees from something like wildfires. So let's take a look at U.S. fires in general. Um, how big of an issue are they? So this chart here from National Interagency Fire Center shows how many fires of almost how many acres there were in each of the last 40 or so years. These are big numbers. There's clearly tens of thousands of fires burning across millions and sometimes tens of millions of acres in the United States. These are very, very large numbers that maybe you didn't appreciate. I certainly did not appreciate. 65,000 fires last year is an insane number. One interesting thing to pull away if you begin to chart this kind of information is the following. The number of fires every year has remained relatively stable. This blue line shows that it's kind of been a stable, maybe even a slight decrease in the number of fires. But the acres being burned by these fires is increasing, which means that increasing pretty dramatically, basically tripling in the last 40 years. And so this means that while there's approximately the same number of fires on average, maybe even a little bit lower, the fires are more devastating. And there's a few reasons for that. You might say fires are stable or going down because preventative measures have been better, technology has been better. We don't have as many wooden houses or gas burning stoves that can cause these fires. But the fires are more devastating for a bunch of reasons. Obviously, there's some climate change issues exposed there, such as global warming begins to rise and there's longer durations of heat, then forests dry out, which makes them more burnable and more flammable. So that doesn't mean more fires get sparked, but it does mean when a fire does get sparked, it quickly spreads a lot faster. Another reason is that over the last 40 years, humans have moved further and further outside of cities. And they are living on the encampments or on the border between urban and very rural and uh, forest heavy regions, which means that in a place that is very flammable, such as the forest, all of a sudden you have people living there. So there are more human inspired fires happening in those areas, not across the board, but specifically in flammable areas. And there's a bunch of other reasons here. And these fires are obviously devastating. I mean, you've seen that the LA fires was forecast to be the costliest blaze in history, over $200 billion in losses. This article came out in the middle of January, so maybe the numbers got up. And just to give you some context, we'll get to that other one in a moment. But to give you some context here, that $200 billion marker, it's a really big number. This article is, I think, a year or two old, but it shows other fires and how costly they are. There have been many, many fires reaching over the $1 billion mark. Here's, I don't know, the top 15 or so, and all of them are over $1 billion in costs. You can also see that in another way of these are happening in places you might not expect. So, of course, there's many fires in California. This, from that same article, shows the deadliest fires in history by number of fatalities. Sure, California is on here many times, and so is Arizona, and that makes sense. But look at this. The top six are not California. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Hawaii, Idaho. Unless you happen to be a resident of that area, this blew my mind that Wisconsin and Minnesota are all of the top three. That's really surprising to me. And so that can begin to give you a sense of how widespread this issue is and how you may have employees living in wildfire prone areas that you may not even know about. And this chart sort of shows a little bit of that. So this is a live feed from fireweatheravalanche.org, a nonprofit, that shows all the wildfires happening in the country right now. And these green ones are new wildfires, so things that have just coming up. These are major blazes, these large red ones. So you see there's major blazes. It looks like there's about 10 or so of them happening in the country right now. The gray ones are fires that have been contained recently. The red ones are, I think, extreme fires that have been going on for some time. So there's many, many fires happening at once all over the country in places like South Carolina and Tennessee and Kentucky, places I didn't realize personally that this was an issue. And obviously in California, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, maybe places where we know that this is more of an issue. So that's a look at US wildfires. Now, the next obvious question is what can we actually do about this, if anything? Like, what are companies doing? And just to spark a few ideas there for you, Disney, after the LA fires, which obviously impacted Disney pretty heavily, they donated over $15 million to recovery efforts. I think somewhere in here, they talk a little bit about the impact of Disney, or maybe it was a different article, but I think 300 Disney employees had to evacuate. Some of them were really injured. So Disney donated directly to these wildfire recovery efforts. You could also look at law firms who do this. Quinn Emanuel is a law firm mentioned here that is not one of the world's biggest law firms, but they donated $500,000 in 2 days. So really quickly, they have a lot of employees there in an office. So they immediately put money in there. Quinn Emanuel is also giving services. So they are the first law firm to represent victims of the LA wildfires. And so they are giving not just money like Disney, but also services and say, what is Quinn Emanuel good at? We're a law firm. We can file suit and give people some sort of financial compensation. And so they're doing that to respond. Amazon is another company that's doing similar work. They've given $10 million in relief efforts as well as essential items. So this makes sense. They put a lot of people on the ground. They've donated a lot of capital, and they've also donated 500,000 items to organizations in that area. So things like recovery items to rebuild homes, or masks, or medical equipment. All that has been incredibly helpful. They've got this concept of second disasters, meaning when a wildfire happens, that is a problem. It hurts people. It affects their homes, ruins their businesses. But then there are these secondary disasters of how do you survive in the weeks after that. Another example of a company that gave services and not, or services or products and not money, is Planet Fitness. I thought this was really great. Planet Fitness, the gym, opened doors to residents in all of these LA areas. They said, "Hey, if you want to come use our showers, our bathrooms, our spas, our gyms, come on in, recharge, take care of yourself." This is a wonderful act by a place like Planet Fitness that cost them nothing. In some ways, it might actually help their business because maybe these people become members, but that is not the main point here. The main point is that they opened up I mean, what is this, 80 locations in that area? Other gyms did something similar, where um, they opened up their gyms for people there. And then there's this wonderful article that just summarizes how a bunch of different companies are responding to these businesses, to these wildfires. Comcast gave money, as well as helping out Habitat for Humanity. Paramount, obviously, a lot of the movie studios gave money. Lowe's, again, super on brand, but they gave a lot of support here because those are things that matter to them, and a lot of other examples in here to sort of spark your guys' thinking about what a company could do. Clorox gave $100,000 to the Red Cross, which is not a massive amount of money, but is very kind and I'm sure appreciated. I think somewhere around Airbnb is another great example. They gave emergency housing. That's what I wanted to show of here's a service we can provide and exclusively we can provide. That is incredibly helpful. Verizon's another great example. Verizon didn't focus on giving money, but they waived all text, data, Wi-Fi services, which was incredibly helpful to say, hey, right now, paying your bills should not be your biggest issue. Connectivity to people and emergency services is your biggest issue. Just focus on that. So, those are a few examples of what you could do, companies are doing to actually support these issues. Now, let's be specific and say, what can a company do before, during, and after a wildfire to support its employees? So I'm going to give a few examples. So before the wildfire ever happened, you have identified, you use Beehive or some other tool, you've identified that you have employees living in a wildfire risk area. What can you do? Well, there's training, there's providing equipment, and there's helping with insurance. So for training, you might bring in people who can train your employees on wildfire preparedness, make the thing open to all, certainly, but actually tell employees who live in these areas and say, hey, we've identified you live in a wildfire prone area. Do you want to join this free training where we'll help you out to understand how to survive a wildfire, what you do, where you go, how you should train your family, what to do if the kids are in different places. So you can provide these sorts of trainings. You can provide or coach on evacuation kits. This is really important to have some sort of evacuation kit. Certainly, when I lived in San Francisco, which was prone to earthquakes, my wife and I had a bag packed in the closet that had some water bottles, some clothes, some walkie-talkies, just like stuff you'd need. We thankfully never needed that. But providing that stuff is really important. You hear stories all the time of people escaping the LA fires and saying, "Well, thank goodness I had this bag packed because it had clothes for my kids and emergency medical equipment I use." And so that's really helpful. So maybe you buy these kits for your employees, or maybe you just point them in the right direction. And then insurance is another one. We're going to talk about insurance once again in the after section, but insurance really matters here. If your employees do not have proper home insurance, they're going to have a very difficult time getting back in their homes and restarting their lives after this issue. So you can hire an insurance company or insurance consultant, do a review of all your employees' home insurance, obviously opt in so that your employees can know, hey, do we think you have properly price this risk? Is there anywhere where you'd benefit from better insurance and maybe even support them financially in buying that insurance, just like you do with health insurance or anything like that? So that's a few things you can do very, very proactively. Now, what happens when the wildfire breaks out? I think there's two ways you can get involved and help your employees immediately. The first is notifications, and the second is supporting evacuation. So around notifications, there's softwares that you can use that notify your employees of nearby wildfires, which obviously counties and states have software like this, and you've seen maybe received emergency notifications to your phone. That's great. Consider what's happening right now in federal government and that FEMA may lose many of its funds and a lot of its funding, which means that local notification systems are going to get a lot less reliable. And you heard this story even in Los Angeles, even in January before the new administration, where these county lines were a little arbitrary and the fire crossed counties. And so one county was really good at notifying people, the other county was not. And so there's stories of people who were like staring out at the fires, waiting for the notification to come, and it just never came because their county did not have a reliable system. You can be that reliable system. You can use software or buy software that helps notify your employees. And I think this is going to get even more important the next 4 years. Second is evacuation. Evacuation is a really expensive and complicated and scary process. When you're evacuating, there's a lot going through your mind. There's certainly what's the best way to keep me and my family safe. There's what's going to happen in my home. There's how much is this evacuation going to cost me? Is this going to be a really problematic thing where I need to pay thousands of dollars for hotels and whatever? What's going to happen to my job? How do I take care of my kids? All those things are going through your head. Now, you can't solve all these problems for your employees, and Maybe there's some that it's not your responsibility, you might think. But there are certain things that you can do. You can have a policy that supports the cost of evacuation so that when somebody's thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to cost me thousands of dollars to get a hotel or to get my family out, they can know that their employer will compensate them for $500 of their evacuation costs. And that's really, really helpful. The second is sort of hotel partnerships. Where do I go? What do I do? Oh my God, hotel's about $1,000 a night. You can, and this takes more time, but you can create partnerships with hotels, partnerships with Uber and taxi services that say, hey, we want to get our employees in faster. So maybe you create a partnership with Hilton that says, hey, if a wildfire ever happens, we want to be able to book rooms for our hotel, for our employees in that area immediately and get your employees in there. That is a wonderful way to help. And the last is job safety and security. They want to know that they don't need to be worried about keeping their job. That's really important. Making people are worried about going on vacation and that affecting their job. Certainly, if a wildfire like this happens, they don't need to be thinking about their job. And so having a process to make sure that the manager of these people or HR reaches out and says, don't worry about it. You're good. Get out, get safe, take care of your family. If you wind up in a hotel for a week and teenage kids are with you or elementary school kids are with you and you need to go homeschool and you can't work, we will figure it out. Your job is safe. And that was a really important psychological thing you can do to protect the kids. What about after? The disaster has finally concluded. Firefighters did their wonderful job and they are safe. What about after? So there's a couple things you can do here too. Recovery funds, supporting products and services, and again, insurance. Recovery funds is really about setting a plan. I hear a lot of a wildfire happens, some disaster happens, a company's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to act? How can we help? And then they set a meeting for the next week, and then somebody cancels, so they move it back 3 days, and then they say, we should definitely do something, but we need the CFO on there. Let's get the CFO on there. Hey, can we approve this? That's too high, but let me get a check by the board. And then 3 or 4 weeks have passed, and then the moment's over, and then we all move on. Set a plan that says, here's how we support people or communities in the instance that a wildfire happens. Maybe that's matching donations from your employees and say, hey, for every dollar our employee donates to one of these charities, we donate money. Maybe that's supporting your employees. If you have to evacuate and your home's affected, automatically you get $1,000 bonus. Whatever it is, set that plan and you can move that money. We can also donate more than money. I give examples. Law firms can donate services. Product companies can donate their products. Gyms donated space. Restaurants can donate food. You can move more than just money so that you make this a low cost effort for yourself. And then again, insurance. I give the example here of the disability insurance that a woman needs to apply for after she's had a child. It is a painful process depending on your state to go to the state, say I've had the child, say here's what happened, here's how I get the money. The company covers part of it, but not all of it. And that depends on the company and the state in which you had the baby and all those and how long you've been at the company. And oh my God, it is a huge pain. And that pain is obviously awful for the individual, but it's also problematic for the company because before somebody has the child, they're spending a lot of time thinking about this insurance and negotiating it and filling out forms. And so many companies work with external partners that do all the disability insurance stuff for their employees. You can do a similar service around home insurance and around helping people get the funds that they have earned from their insurance companies and unlocking that so that they can get back onto their homes quickly. Obviously, that has a business benefit here, which is once somebody's back in a home quickly and they have the money and they're safe, then they can get back to work and be fully dedicated. And it's also got the human benefit of being an amazing perk, an amazing reason an amazing way to show that you care about your employees, an amazing way to retain them and make sure that you appreciate how big of an issue a climate disaster like this is and how they can trust you to respond. So, if I were in your shoes, where would I start? What would I do? I would do this now. Build your standard operating procedure just with one action item. Don't overthink it. Don't make it complicated. Don't make it cost a lot of money. Just one thing. So just get your CFO to agree to make some sort of donation, $1,000, $50,000, $1 million if you're a giant, giant company when a certain disaster hits a zip code and say, hey, boss, I want us to just have a statement that says every time a wildfire causes devastation of this amount of dollars or this amount of news or this category wildfire, I'd like to move $1,000 to the American Red Cross or to employees impacted by that, whatever. Or just do a training. Say, hey, you know what? I don't want to move any money for it. Maybe I don't even want to hire someone to do this. I'm going to prepare training. And once a year or once every 6 months, I'm going to offer a free 1 hour disaster preparedness training. Maybe bring in an expert. Maybe it's just something you learn how to do that says, here's how our employees can stay safe during a fire. Or just create a templated email that goes out to managers of impacted employees. So when you have a disaster and employees are impacted, tell the managers with some sort of templated email that's everyone's approved, hey, this is happening to your employee. This is what you need to do. Reach out, say you're going to take over their work. Do not contact them until they contact you for at least 3 days. Whatever you want to put in there, have that as a template so it's all preset, and that'll move so much faster when disaster actually strikes. So hopefully that has been helpful to everybody. Um, Again, Beehive can help you run your enterprise climate risk management program, which means it'll help you identify how many employees you have in these high risk areas and then who might be impacted. And then we'll begin to give you some of these templates to actually build your preparedness program. So if that feels interesting, please reach out. Next week, we're going to be interviewing Asheen Fancy, who runs ESG at PagerDuty, about how he built his program, what he does, what he's focused on. And so I hope you can all join that. Thank you very much.